you go back to the days of the Roman chariots, I'm pretty sure people were racing them as well. Frankly, I think for as long as man has roamed the earth, speed challenges between humans have been commonplace. Despite what the media would have you believe, street racing was around long before the Fast and Furious movies. And honestly, it'll probably never end. We'll look at the reasons why it probably will never end right after the break. Did you know that the average driver gets 9 traffic tickets in their lifetime? Look, I'll be the first to admit that I've taken maybe a couple of liberties with traffic laws back in the day. And of course, when I got caught, I had to go to court to fight the ticket, which was always a hassle. And each time that I lost my case, it meant big fines, points on my record, and higher insurance premiums. Eventually, I realized that nothing beats having a good attorney argue your case in court. So here's what you do. You download the Off the Record app to your phone and register for an account. And if you get a ticket, simply upload a photo of your ticket into the app and you will be quickly matched with a lawyer in your jurisdiction. Your lawyer will start working your case right away, and in most cases, you'll never have to set foot in a courtroom. Off the Record has a 97% success rate and a 4.9 star rating on Google. And guess what? They even offer a money-back guarantee if they aren't able to reduce the points or keep that ticket fully off your record. Best of all, I've arranged a 10% discount for all of my YouTube viewers, so download the app and register using the referral code FASTLIFE to receive 10% off your first case. About 6 months before The Fast and Furious was released in theaters, I received a phone call from a very concerned person who was working over at Universal Pictures back then. This person told me that Universal was very worried about the movie being accused of glorifying street racing, and the movie wasn't even out yet. So this concern might have stemmed from early reviews in focus groups before the movie was released, or perhaps it originated from advanced copies of the movie that were being sent to critics and SAG members, or perhaps the movie trailers that aired on TV were enough to draw criticisms. Either way, they were very concerned and they wanted to take action. It was such a big concern and they were so worried that Paul Walker was asked to do a public service announcement that they actually played in the theaters just before the movie started up on the big screen. And it went something like this. Hey everybody, the scenes you're about to watch were done by professional stunt drivers on closed roads. Pretty standard fare, right? Or maybe it said something like, please don't drive your bone stock Honda Civic under a tractor trailer, or words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And of course, after the movie came out, news reporters were quick to blame the Fast and Furious movie for any traffic accident or incident that was at least partly attributable to speed, as if the drivers had no personal responsibility. This was unprecedented, but the truth is that street racing movies go back to at least the 1950s. There was a motion picture called Johnny Dark that starred Tony Curtis, who is the father of Jamie Lee Curtis. You might remember her from True Lies, and what was it? Trading Places, among other movies. And then there was another feature film simply called Hot Rod that also appeared in 1950. This one you might have missed because I watched it, and I can tell you, it didn't seem very good nowadays, but who knows back then. And then in the 1970s, there was a resurgence of street racing movies, starting with Two-Lane Blacktop. Well, that comes to mind. And of course, American Graffiti, which starred Harrison Ford and a whole bunch of people you might remember from television and movies way back then. Both were movies that were focused almost 100% on street racing. Sure, there were some backstories and all that other kind of stuff, competition and rivalries and girls and all that kind of stuff, pretty much like Fast and Furious, but these movies already existed. Now they're 50 years old today. They were 40 years old when the first movie came out. So street racing was not invented by Universal. It wasn't glorified by Universal. Street racing movies were not invented by Fast and Furious. I saw both these movies when I was young. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley back in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, and muscle cars were still the big thing, and so I really liked those movies. Back then, though, a lot of street racing took place under the bridges in Percoimers, what we used to call it, which basically a section of road on San Fernando Road not far from Roxford Street and the Balboa Boulevard intersection. I had been there several times back then, and it was a weird time. Back then, a brand new Trans Am, which made 185 horsepower from a 6.6 liter V8, would run a high 15-second quarter mile. We're not talking about, race cars at this point. Looking back, street racing back then was taken much more seriously by the participants. They were doing track prep. They were bringing slicks and all that kind of thing. They had proper suspension, no stereo systems, all that kind of stuff. Several things were different back then from what we see today. Very different, in fact. For starters, people did not stand next to the road beyond the starting line. Why not? Because a car going 120 miles per hour is moving 176 feet per second. So if the car starts to slide sideways, it's moving 176 miles an hour. There's very low probability that you're going to be able to move quickly enough to make sure that you didn't get turned into hamburger. People were just more aware then, apparently, that you can get hit and killed by a 4,000-pound projectile. Today's cars are much faster and the risk are even greater, especially for people who are standing alongside the road. Of course, there were no cell phones back then. There was no video cameras back then. So these events were only known to participants, and so you had to know somebody who was in the know to even get invited to one. Another thing was there was nobody putting their Instagram handle on the side of their cars because Instagram didn't exist. They certainly didn't leave their name and address on the side of the car. You know, they were a little more careful about hiding their identity, that kind of thing. Nor was there a Facebook or a YouTube back then, so none of these actions wound up online because there really was nothing online. It didn't even really exist back then. The fact is that street racing is and has been illegal for decades, going back to at least the 1950s. Section 23109 of the California Vehicle Code covers street racing. Spectating is also illegal, so is blocking off intersections, roads, highways, parking lots, whatever. It's all illegal. It's called aiding and abetting, and it's against the law. Section 22350 covers revving engines, burnouts, rapid acceleration. Even squealing your tires a little bit from the stop sign falls under this section. So they got 1,000 different ways to get you, and to write you up, pull you out of the car, search the car, and all that kind of stuff. But today it's very different. Much of the showmanship that we are seeing at sideshows is amplified by social media, and it's often done by these participants solely to get attention of the social media audience. Hey, look at me, and all that kind of stuff. Not good, because the cops look at this as an act of defiance. I've been watching these sideshows come into their own in the last few years on social media, and the showmanship has become much more dangerous and risky, seemingly for no other reason than to get likes and followers for the perpetrators, and it's getting pretty dangerous. Back then, we never did intersection takeovers because we didn't want to get arrested, and that was a sure way to get arrested. And frankly, the general attitude back then was that it takes very little talent to do a donut, but winning a street race was an actual accomplishment. Doing a donut was just showboating and showing off, and accomplished absolutely nothing. By the same token, though, we were certainly smart enough not to run out in the middle of someone doing donuts because we didn't want to be a part of the group that is getting arrested. Or maybe we just knew that you could probably get hit by a car and nobody was going to pick you up. We also knew back then if you were rolling around with expired registrations, cops would pull you over every single time they saw your car if it had expired tags. Ask me how I know this. Back then, we also knew that not having a valid driver's license or insurance was sure to result in our cars being impounded, getting hefty fines, and giant increases in our car insurance rates if we were pulled over and the cops asked for your documentation. From what I see on social media accounts these days, there seems to be many people who don't really care, and they go to these sideshows with no license, no registration, no insurance, illegal mods, and often with loaded weapons in the cars. What are you doing, man? If you want to be under the radar, forget it, you're just going to go to jail. Even if these folks aren't racing or swinging their cars, any of the above-mentioned infractions are cause to stop, detain, and arrest you and impound your car. So you could just be standing there blocking off the intersection, and cops come into your car, and they're going to find all that stuff, and you're going to jail. And from the looks of some of these cars, some of these participants can barely afford a tank of gas. So I certainly can't understand the logic of rolling dirty to an illegal event and pasting their Instagram handles on their car and doing donuts, burnouts, and all that other kind of stuff with your license plate still attached to the car. What are we doing here? I'd like to think that back in my days, most of us back then would have been smart enough to refrain from doing that if those options were available, but I can't say that for sure. I'm sure that we had plenty of showboats in our little circles back then. I didn't know many of them, but I'm sure somewhere around. My point is that back then, the cops literally had to catch you in the act. Today, it's a very different story, and it was a different time back then, and the attitudes were different on both sides from then to now. For example, on many occasions, the cops knew some of the racers. They'd pull up. It was basically a small town. The cops would just ask us, you're making a lot of noise, you guys got to move on. Basically, we were always in a deserted industrial area where there was zero civilians in the area. And so if we just stopped what we were doing and moved on, we'd be okay. As long as we were being safe. 2 cars just go and they turn around and come back. Today, it seems like people want to block intersections, defy the cops, taunt them flee from the cops, and then taunt them on social media. And they come right back to the next event and do it all over again. Most of the good spots have been burned, but people come back week after week and they do the same shit again and wonder why they get arrested. Posting videos on social media channels is just making it easier to catch and convict offenders. You want an example? Last year, a YouTuber right near where I live here in South Orange County found out the hard way that posting yourself during the commission of a crime is probably not such a great idea. This guy was no brain surgeon, let me tell you. This dude. It's almost too.
A few moments later.
It's like robbing a bank, you know, instead doing an Instagram live. What are we doing? How freaking stupid do you have to be? Cliff notes, dude films himself and his homies on the toll roads doing 160 miles an hour and posts the videos to his own YouTube channel. The police start a task force. They spend 6 months investigating it. The cops see the videos, they gather the evidence from the guy's own YouTube videos and all the supporting guys, looks up their license plates and all that kind of stuff. Search warrants get served, the cars get impounded, and the main dude at the center of the investigation had his license revoked, and he is unable to drive until all this is settled, and he's surely going to lose his license for a long, long time, and he'll probably drive without a license, right? I also follow several Instagram police pages that focus on illegal street racers. That's usually my Saturday morning entertainment. The comments section of some of these posts leads me to believe that our school system is failing miserably because the weak excuses and the arguments defy basic logic, and some people struggle to put together a complete sentence that's anywhere comprehensible. But basically it comes down to this. There are 4 basic anti-enforcement arguments postulated by some of these commenters. Street racing is a victimless crime. Derp, derp, derp. Wrong. I can cite you a whole bunch of incidents where innocent people have been killed in street races. And if you don't know about these incidents, then I don't know what news channels you're following. In one local sideshow, a dude who thought it was smart to stand on the side running board of an F-150 pickup truck while he was doing donuts was killed when the truck rolled over on top of him and flattened him like a pancake. The truck is making a left-hand turn. He's standing on the right side, and the truck falls over and flattens him like a pancake. The driver was actually his own cousin. This happened around Christmas time. So there's a couple of guys who didn't pay attention in physics class. And this kid hit a mom and a child, a toddler, and just got sentenced to 24 years in prison. This kid had a long list of speeding offenses, and if you look at the guy, he looks like one of those guys who's just showing off all the time and just never got slapped down for it. Now he's going to spend 2.5 decades in jail. It's all fun and games until you're sitting inside a police cruiser with silver bracelets on, right? And you ain't going home for the night. And here's another one. This guy, this was all over the news. A guy in a Dodge Challenger, surprise, killed 3 people and a UPS driver, also a repeat offender, because he was speeding down the highway, 100 plus mile an hour, like racing on the freeway is racing. That's just a game of chicken, whoever chickens out first. This guy's going to jail for 22 years. He also had a long list of speeding offenses. And I'm sorry, it's just impossible to feel sorry for these perpetrators. And I know this is an unpopular opinion, but actions have consequences. Sometimes commenters who are clearly not thinking this through will say things like, well, why don't you go after real criminals? Like street racing, again, is not a big crime or it's not worth enforcing. Just 2 counterpoints of that argument, if I may. For starters, we have to understand these enforcement actions are being conducted by street racing task forces. This is their sole job. They have all come together and they're assigned and charged with stopping street races. And I gotta tell you, they're getting really good at catching offenders. The cops are using helicopters, drones, infrared, and combining forces with other agencies and making the consequences very, very expensive, and they're not cutting anybody any slack. But think about this. Imagine running from a sideshow raid. You get home at 2 a.m. and at 4 a.m. the cops kick in your door and pull you out of bed in front of your parents because you're still living at home because your car insurance is high from all those tickets you have, and you're driving a mediocre car because your car payment is high because you have high interest rate. Depending on the offense, a felony conviction will be stapled to every job application you submit for the rest of your life. Think about that. You can't get hired here because you have a felony conviction. So if you're okay with the career of flipping hamburgers, go ahead and run from the cops and see what happens. If you don't get caught this time, you probably will the next time or the time after that. It's just a matter of time. And number 2, if your wife or your mom or your child was killed by a street racer, would you still say that it's a victimless crime? Wouldn't you want the perpetrator to be held accountable? I know I would. And another one of my favorite arguments is usually some sort of variation of, I'm too fast to the cops, man. Only the slow guys get caught, yada, yada, yada. Or I'm a great driver. I've never had a crash. I'm not going to crash. I'm never going to hurt anybody, yada, 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 yada. Okay, you know who was a great driver? Roger Rodas. Remember that name? Remember Roger Rodas? He was the guy that crashed his Porsche Carrera GT in an incident that killed Paul Walker. You think you're better than him behind the wheel? Okay, that guy was a professional racer. Some things are beyond your control on the street. Is it worth your life? Is it worth someone else's life? Another argument I often hear is the lack of racetracks near my house. Now this one has a little bit of bite, and let me explain. Basically they go on to say the government should open more tracks near my house. Okay, decent point. Unfortunately, the reality is that the government is not obligated to satisfy your hobby. If you love scuba diving and you live in Nebraska, would you ask the state government to dig you a lake near your house just so it was more convenient for you? That's just not the way it works. When is it the government responsibility to provide people with entertainment? Come on, man. Besides that, Southern California used to have a ton of drag strips, and illegal street racing was still a big problem back then, even when we had 5 or more drag strips within a 45-minute drive of downtown Los Angeles. We had Terminal Island, we had LACR, we had Auto Club Speedway. Back in the day, we had Lions, all that kind of stuff. But most of these tracks were not making money because not enough people were going to the track, and so most of them were sold off for the value of the real estate. The property was more valuable than the ticket sales that they get on weekends. And let's not forget that many people at these sideshows and street races don't even have a valid driver's license, so they wouldn't be allowed to race at one of those tracks anyway because they check your driver's license and you have to sign a waiver. And so here's where we are today in 2022. Many states are drafting or have already enacted tough street racing measures, and it's getting ugly in other parts of the country, and before long it's going to be here. Some of those rules are working to some extent, but street racing is still a big, big, big problem. And if history is any indication, that can really only mean one thing. Stricter laws are coming. Even if they don't catch you racing, the cops pop your hood and they're dishing out state referee tickets. And that means you have to go to a state referee and put all your smog equipment back in your car if you're caught. And people don't want to do that. So some people just stop registering in their cars, and then it compounds the problem. But still, it won't deter some people. They'll put it back to stock, and then right after they clear it, they'll modify it again. But realistically, I figure we're maybe 1 or 2 more serious crashes away from enacting legislation that will allow the courts to crush your car, whether it's paid for it or not. And the precedent has been set. There was a law that was doing that. There's still laws like that in other parts of the country. This guy, for example, had his car crushed, and no, you can't take your parts off before they crush the car. So that's coming because people are still doing intersection takeovers, sideshows, blocking off freeways, and all that other stuff. So it's going to get ugly, and it's going to be bad. But just so I'm clear, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm merely explaining the risks and the consequences. Your parents have probably told you this. I'm not your parent. I'm a dude in the same space that you are, and I certainly don't want to see young people killed in the prime of their lives, but I know many people just will ignore the warnings no matter where they come from, and they will just keep facing the consequences, and that's sad. I have a young friend who got busted for exhibition of speed after many previous tickets in his BMW. It got so bad that he finally couldn't afford the car insurance and the car payment anymore because of his convictions. It was just too much on him. Frankly, he was lucky he never killed anyone, and he didn't die. So all things considered, he was lucky. But now he's rolling in a used V6 SN95 Mustang, which some might say is a penalty worse than death. And that's sad. Some people will never learn. That's it for this episode, everybody. Thanks so much for watching, and please remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you next time.